Hello all, I hope you're doing well وكل سنة وانتم طيبين ويا رب تبقوا قضيتوا أجازة سعيدة. In this presentation, I will be highlighting the most important points you need to know about Aristotle's Poetics, which constitutes the criticism part of the course, right? And before I start, I'd like to let you know that the questions in the exams with reference to Aristotle's Poetics will be objective questions. So you might be asked to fill in the blanks, say whether the statement is true or false, choose the correct answer. So generally speaking, it is going to be a an objective, objective questions with reference to the criticism part. To start with, let me introduce Aristotle's Poetics. It is actually the earliest surviving work of Greek dramatic theory and the first extant philosophical treatise to focus on literary theory. In this text, Aristotle offers an account of poetry and more literally the poetic art, deriving from the term for poet, author, or maker. He divides the art of poetry into. So when we talk about drama, for Aristotle, drama is actually part of the art of poetry. So he divides the art of poetry into verse drama, which includes comedy, tragedy, and the satire play, lyric poetry, and epic. The Poetics of Aristotle contains not only his observations of 5th century drama and that of his own time, but also his personal preferences. In many aspects, the Poetics is a critique of Plato's views on art and poetry. I am going to focus on two major theories, the theory of mimesis and the theory of catharsis. And you need to know what the theory of mimesis is, the definition of the theory, and to understand what he really means by mimesis. So, according to him, poetry, like all other arts, is a mode of imitation, and actually, imitation means mimesis. The function of the poet or the artist is to imitate through media appropriate to the given art, not particular historical events, characters, emotions, but the universal aspects of life. Aristotle says an artistic representation differs from ordinary reality in that elements which are elsewhere scattered and separate are here combined in a unity. So simply, mimesis means imitation, right? And what the poet does is simply to imitate things in life, to imitate events, characters, emotions, right? To imitate universal aspects of life. Again, poetry is an act of creation because it imitates mental impressions. It is therefore an idealization and not a direct copy of human life. It is closer to reality than the concrete situation since the universal is truer than the particular, right? So simply he says here that since poetry is an act of creation, it imitates mental impressions and therefore it is not a Xeroxed copy of human life, but therefore an idealization of human life. All arts, for example, poetry and music, they differ from one another in four different aspects. The first one is the media they employ. The second one is the objects they imitate. The third one is their manner of imitation. And the fourth one is their proper function or simply their purpose. Now, let me take each one of these points and explain them in detail. The media they employ, whatever they do, whatever they use in order to imitate, in order to produce this, copy or image or idealization of life. Poetry employs language, it employs rhythm, and it employs harmony or music. In dancing, rhythm alone is used. In playing an instrument, rhythm and harmony. But actually, in poetry, we use these three aspects: language, rhythm, and harmony. Epic poetry, in specific, employs language and rhythm. Lyric poetry employs language, rhythm, and harmony. Tragedy and comedy the same. Three media as lyric, language, rhythm, and harmony as well. But at times only language and rhythm when we talk about the dialogue of the actors. At times all three combined when we have choral lyrics. It is not the use of meter that makes poetry, but rather the element of imitation of the universal. A person who writes on a scientific subject is in verse is not actually a poet. So simply when we talk about poetry here, the media that it uses or that it employs in order to imitate life is language, rhythm, and harmony. And of course here gives different examples of what epic poetry employs, what tragedy and comedy employ, what dance employs, and so on and so forth. The second idea is the objects of imitation. Actually, what do you imitate, right? So we imitate human beings in action, the characters, the acts, and the emotions. Simply, the persons imitated will be either higher than average, they will be idealistic, or they will be average, realistic, or lower than average, caricature. So we're dealing with idealism, realism, and caricature. Tragedy imitates persons better than average, comedy those worse than average. So when we talk about tragedy, it imitates people, who are more or less idealistic, whereas when you refer to comedy, it imitates people in a caricature way. Actually, according to Aristotle, he believes definitely that tragedy is more important than comedy, and I'll be explaining why in a minute, because this has to do more or less with the theory of catharsis. The third aspect is the manner of imitation. How do you actually imitate? So, 3 points here. Completely indirect imitation, as in straight narrative, or partly indirect and partly direct, as in epic, which contains both narrative and speeches of characters. And finally, entirely direct action, as in drama, where the entire incident is acted out before the audience. Drama actually means action. So we have three manners of imitation: indirect imitation, indirect and direct imitation, and finally direct imitation, which is actually drama in itself. The fourth aspect here is the proper function. What is the use of this imitation, right? And here he refers to the psychology of artistic creation and the enjoyment of art. Simply, these are the two main functions. Why do you actually imitate things from real life? Works of art are created because it is instinctive in man to imitate, and because of the human instinct for rhythm and harmony. People are always interested in music and rhythm and so on. People enjoy observing works of art for various reasons. So, four reasons here why people like to watch imitation, i.e., tragedy, comedy, listen to poetry, and so on. One, there is pleasure in seeing certain things and events imitated. For example, a murder or a dead body or an operation, which would be painful to observe in real life. The second point, from art we often learn something new, and people take pleasure in learning. Third point, if there is nothing new to be learned from the imitation, there can be pleasure in the recognition of what we already know. And number four, there is pleasure in observing the technical perfection of a work of art. So, four reasons, according to Aristotle, why people would want to watch imitation. Watch imitation, i.e., he's referring to poetry, he's referring to tragedy, he's referring to comedy, and so on and so forth. So, the four reasons are pleasure in seeing certain things that would be very painful for you to see in real life. Two, you try to learn something new. Three, you try to feel pleased in the recognition of what we know. So you already know this, and you're so happy that you're seeing this, performed. And number four, there is pleasure in observing the technical perfection of a work of. Then Aristotle comes to define comedy, tragedy, and epic. And this is how he defines comedy. He believes that comedy involves the imitation of lower types of men whose faults are ridiculous. And according to Aristotle, what is ridiculous is ugly and consists of faults acts or deformities which do not cause pain to anyone. Like, for example, wearing a funny mask, throwing pies, slipping on a banana peel. History of the development of comedy is obscure. So, as you see here from the definition of comedy, he actually believes that comedy is not important at all, and the main focus is going to be on tragedy, more or less. So, according to him, comedy imitates lower types of men in a caricatural way. The faults of these men are ridiculous, and therefore they are ugly, right? And he's not really one of the people who thinks that comedy is important, or that comedy is useful, or that comedy does anything to the human being. Although I do feel that sometimes we need comedy, just to laugh. Sometimes you need to get more or less deviated from reality, from what's happening in the world, and you would want really to watch something that is comic, to to feel entertained. But, according to Aristotle, this is not really the case. And then he comes to define or differentiate between epic and tragedy. He says that they have the same objects of imitation, i.e., both of them imitate actions of men of higher type, i.e., idealism, but they differ in manner of imitation, number one, in which epic is a combination of direct and indirect narrative, whereas tragedy only depends on direct action. Media of imitation, for epic does not have music or spectacle, but actually in tragedy there could be music and spectacle. Verse form, which in epic is single, it's written in dactylic hexameter. In tragedy it is actually varied. And number four, the length, which in epic is not fixed, but in tragedy is approximately 1 day. Right? It's not really the drama itself, but the setting. I think he took this in drama. That the whole thing should take place in 24 hours. And this is again related to Aristotle himself. According to Aristotle, tragedy is more complex than epic, for it contains all the elements of epic and, in addition, music and spectacle. Therefore, a good judge of tragedy is also a good judge of epic. Let's talk about tragedy in specific here. What is tragedy? When we talk about the objects of imitation, he says that in tragedy there is imitation of serious action, complete in itself, so far as size is concerned. With reference to media, there is rhythm, there is language, there is melody. Actually, Greek tragedy is poetic drama, employing alternation of dialogue and choral odes. Manner, we have direct action, not narrative. And finally, purpose, and this is the most important point here that I need to focus on, to arouse pity and fear and effect pleasurable catharsis. Right? To arouse pity and fear. I'm going to talk to you about catharsis in a second. So, this is Aristotle's definition of tragedy. A tragedy is the imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, in language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament, the several kinds being found in several parts of the play, in dramatic, not in narrative form, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish its catharsis of such emotions. So as you see here, the action is serious, the action is complete, the language is embellished, we deal with dramatic, not narrative form, and then finally the incidents arouse pity and fear in order to accomplish catharsis. Now from here, we need to refer to the theory of catharsis. What is the meaning of catharsis? Plato rejects tragedy on the ground that it arouses pity and fear, and therefore makes men emotionally weak. This is Plato. However, Aristotle, on the other hand, believes that tragedy purges away these emotions and makes men stronger. What do you think? Do you think if you watch tragedy, it arouses pity and fear and it makes you feel emotionally weak, or does it make you feel stronger? So this is Plato and this is Aristotle, and it's up to you which one of them to agree with. What is catharsis? It's the process of releasing strong or pent up emotions through art. Catharsis means to cleanse or to purge And it was coined by Aristotle to describe the release of emotional tension that he believed spectators experienced while watching tragedy. So you get this picture here, becomes a metaphor for catharsis. You see this girl in this cage. This cage had a lot of birds inside. Now, according to him, when you watch tragedy, all your feelings of pity and fear and all these, feelings that were hidden inside of you, they more or less get out of the cage and they fly away, making you feel better. All right, this is what Aristotle believes, that you watch tragedy, you start getting these feelings of anger, these feelings of fear, of hatred. You get all of these feelings out of your mind and out of your heart, and you become better because you become more or less cleansed from inside, right? And art, according to Aristotle, plays an important role in letting you release these emotions. In psychoanalysis, catharsis is the release of tension and anxiety that results from bringing repressed feelings and memories into consciousness. In his Poetics, Aristotle argues that the main aim of tragedy is to bring about a purification of emotion, and that tragic plots should evoke pity and fear, especially as these are the emotions most often associated with tragic plots. Pity and fear are often present in persons to excess. By applying more of the same, there will be a pathological release. So, this pathological release is the image that I've just showed you, where the birds are actually fleeing outside the cage, which will be pleasant and it will benefit persons by restoring proper emotional balance. He maintains that we take pleasure in experiencing the emotions involved in such a fictitious scene without being personally harmed. And since tragedy is about nothing but human suffering, we enjoy seeing others suffer, and there's added pleasure because we know it is only a play, not real life. We feel superior to the characters who suffer. And this is a bit complicated. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but according to Aristotle, he really believes here that sometimes we feel some kind of pleasure when we see other people suffering, right? It's more or less sadistic, but then he actually says that you're not really seeing real people suffering, but you're seeing fictional characters suffering on stage, and this will add more pleasure to you because you know that this is not real life and that it is only a play, and that you sometimes feel, well, oh my god, I'm not really suffering that like these people. That is why you feel superior to the characters who suffer because you're not suffering like them. The other idea, which is also important, is the idea of identifying yourself with one of the characters in the play through empathy. Empathy is a very important word here that you need to know. And of course, it is not like sympathy, right? When you sympathize with someone, this means that you feel sad for that person. But when you empathize with a person, you actually put yourself in that person's shoes, right? You tend to identify yourself with that person. Okay, so when we watch a tragedy, we tend to identify ourselves with one of the characters in the play, and in a tragedy it's mainly the tragic hero, right? When the drama is over, we take pleasure both because it hasn't really happened, right, and you're safe and you're happy and there's no problem on your side, and because we realize that our own troubles are minor as compared with what has happened in the tragedy, right? So you start to identify yourself with, for instance, the tragic hero, who more or less is the character that suffers the most in the play, and more or less that dies at the end, right? And after the play is over, this kind of identification is no longer there. So you feel happy. You get this kind of pleasure that, my troubles, or let me go back to my real life. I don't have the same problems like this person. I am so happy because I'm not really suffering like that person. So as you notice here that catharsis is a means through which a person feels that all his emotions are released. And in drama, you know that there is some kind of a logical sequence that needs to happen. So, for instance, that at the end, this is going to happen. You're expecting, the end anyway. So you feel more satisfied. You feel happier that, whatever you expected is taking place now. And because actually, if you think about life itself, there's no logic and there's no order and whatever that is happening in life. So you end up, when we talk about our reality or our real lives, you end up being confused and imbalanced. But with drama, things are completely different. And that is why, according to Aristotle, tragedy is more important than comedy, definitely, because in tragedy, you deal with the imitation of important characters, right? And you tend to more or less empathize with these characters, and at the end of the event, you feel this kind of cathartic effect wherein you release all your bad feelings and all your negative feelings at the end. That is why he believes it is more important to watch tragedies than comedies. Okay. Now, I tried my best to make things as short as possible, right? So, what I need you to focus on here in theory of catharsis, the theory of mimesis, what is poetry according to Aristotle. Okay, just understand the main ideas here, and I'll be sending you a file with that information soon. Thank you so much, and see you soon on campus. Thank you.